Good morning, everyone. It's Allison responding to week 11 of the Palestinian question, are they victims or responsible for their actions? I'd like to make two statements first before going into my answer. One from the text from the King and Queen of Jordan, who stated that the Jordan-Palestinian rift is outdated and in no one's best interest. The second one is that the author addresses the imbalance of power between the Palestinians and Israelis. He says that more than any other power or factor, Israel controls the facts on the ground. And he specifically states in the West Bank and Gaza. Israel decides if borders are opened or closed, people can go to work, people can travel internally, or whether settlements get built, et cetera, et cetera. And then he says, Israel and the decisions it makes about Palestinians will remain the dominant feature of Palestine's political environment for decades to come. So I really agree that some of this conflict is outdated and not serving anyone's best interest. So I think we have to look at it. Are they victims of an imbalance of power? Absolutely. Are they victims of just incredibly poor choices by the people who claim to represent them, the Palestinian Authority and Hamas, Fatah? Yes. Are they victims of trying to recover from war and displacement and even the closing of borders and separation of families and all of those things? Absolutely. I think the biggest issue is that there is no unified voice for the Palestinian people, and the people who are managing their affairs, Hamas or the Palestinian Authority. I don't think that there's a big interest on either of their parts to bring resolution, because then what would their cause be? They are victims. Looking at the masses, they're still responsible for their actions. And I think when the tide kind of started to turn against them were the years of the Second Intifada. That didn't help their cause at all. So they're responsible for their actions, and they're victims of their own actions. I don't want to get caught up in semantics here because of using the word victim. They are a broken, battered people, a nationless people, and they are under the thumb of Israel and what it decides it wants to do about the Palestinian question. However, they have caused themselves harm as well. They have made things worse for themselves. With Hamas or the Palestinian Authority telling them, no, don't go home, or no, stay in the refugee camp, or you're going to lose your right to return. All of those things, poor choices, poor decisions, it's outdated. And that's why I think that it's time for a new strategy, or they will remain in this cycle of victimization, whether it's their perception or it's a reality on the ground. The frame of reference issue with Israel and the 1967 borders and the PLO with the 1948 borders, I feel like it's so easy to say this sitting here in my kitchen, but this issue is now outdated. It has run its course. It is not resolved. While I do believe that negotiations need to continue, the Palestinians have decisions to make that until there is that resolution, do we seek citizenship in Jordan? How do we respond to the fact that the resolution is like not in the short-term sights? Do we choose to stay in refugee status? Do we choose to not demand accountability for the funding that the Palestinian Authority receives on their behalf? Do we choose to let Hamas rule and speak for us as the masses? The problem is there is no solidarity. I'm not even sure how they would create that at this time, but there is no solidarity even in the Palestinian groups. The old and the new elite, what we see in the West Bank and in Gaza is appalling to me. But it's also appalling to me that they're restricted from travel between the two, and so you see one group going one direction and one group going another based on whether or not they have resources. When we cut off Hamas, and then we cut off the people who are under Hamas as well. I do believe those people are victims, and it's really challenging. It's really challenging to not sentence an entire community of people when there's such division within, and they aren't able to make certain choices because they have people over them saying, no, you can't do that, or you have to do it this way, whether it's Israel or Hamas or the Palestinian Authority. So Israel has done quite a bit wrong, I think, and to serve its own interests. The Second Intifada, as I said, huge mistake on the part of the Palestinians. Those years, I believe, actually set them back. The right to return, it's not there, so what do you do in the meantime? I guess that's my question. I really think that people who aren't allowed to return to their homes are victims. I just think that's incredibly wrong. I think it's a human rights issue. It's a human rights concern. As long as security and stability remain the core issues, as long as Israel feels threatened, as long as the Palestinians are without statehood, this is going to continue. So they are responsible for their own decisions. They've made some poor ones, but I can't sentence the masses because, I mean, there are moms and children out there who are just trying to eat every day. So they are victims of this displacement and this crisis. But as Dr. Meredith asked in the lecture video, it's where's the money? And at what point do you say, I'm not going to stay in a refugee status? And if I can't go back to my home and there's no short-term vision for that in my sights, then what am I going to do? And so I think at the individual level there needs to be a change as well. So tough question to answer. Totally hated having to answer it because it's just so incredibly complex. And it's hard for me, and I know that's why we're in grad school, to make statements about the Palestinians, you know, like I said, sitting in my kitchen, not understanding what's happening on the ground. If Israel does, in fact, as the author says, control all the facts on the ground in the West Bank and Gaza, then the Palestinians are going to be struggling for a long time. But Hamas isn't helping, and the Palestinian Authority needs to do a better job. And I agree with Jordanian's leadership that some of this at some point we have to say enough's enough. This is outdated. We're moving forward. This isn't good for anyone. Thanks.